Despite all the loud threats and warlike rhetoric, Iran didn't last that long after a whole series of Israeli airstrikes on Iran, which, by the way, are still ongoing. In Tehran, they suddenly reached out to Washington through Middle Eastern intermediaries with a request to stop the war and start proper substantive negotiations on the nuclear deal. It is now being reported that Iran is strongly indicating that it seeks to end hostilities and resume negotiations on its nuclear programs. They are sending signals to Israel and the United States through Arab intermediaries, asking them to stop this war. Today, it is reported that through Middle Eastern intermediaries, Tehran is reaching out to Washington, and it is also mentioned that Iran has already approached Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Oman, asking them to help persuade United States President Donald Trump to use his influence on Israel. To achieve an immediate ceasefire, Tehran states that it is ready to show flexibility in negotiations on the nuclear program if a ceasefire is reached and the United States does not enter this war. The key point is that the United States has essentially signaled their readiness to get involved in this war, albeit indirectly, but nevertheless, to provide Israel with those bombs that can penetrate bunkers underground in Iran and still destroy the nuclear program. Significantly, American President Donald Trump has already responded to such calls from Iran and stated that yes, Tehran should think about it, because right now is the best time for proper negotiations. Because, to quote the American president, Israel is doing just fine, and supposedly Israel absolutely doesn't need to stop right now, and America is fully on Israel's side. Let's discuss this topic comprehensively together. Why did Iran, which was speaking so aggressively about acts of retaliation, suddenly start sending signals that it wants to end this war and is asking for negotiations? I'm Alexei Pichi, and today is June 16th. Let's go through this step by step. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and write any comment you like. Subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News, for breaking news updates. Link in the video description. So, as reported today, according to officials, in the midst of the fierce Israeli air campaign, Tehran told Arab officials that they would be open to returning to the negotiating table if the United States does not join this attack. They also sent messages to Israel stating that it is in the interest of both sides to restrain the violence. That is, you see, Iran has started, through Arab mediators, to reach out to both Washington and Jerusalem with a request, saying, let's please stop these hostilities because supposedly it's not in anyone's interest. However, since Israeli military planes can now freely fly over Tehran and Iranian counterattacks are causing only minimal damage, Israeli leaders have no incentive to stop the offensive before they take additional measures to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, Iran's missile program, and further weaken the power of the theocratic government. Moreover, Israel's ongoing attacks on Iran have not yet caused any new damage to nuclear facilities. Natanz is in Isfahan province and Fordow is in Qom province. This was announced today by the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, at an extraordinary meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors. According to him, since the strike on Friday, when the above-ground part of the experimental uranium enrichment plant in Natanz was destroyed, no additional damage has been recorded. At the same time, Grossi noted that although there are no signs of a direct hit on the underground part of the complex, its power supply system was destroyed, which could have damaged the uranium enrichment centrifuges used there. In total, as a result of Israel's strikes on the site in Isfahan, 4 facilities were affected: the Central Chemical Laboratory, the uranium processing plant, the fuel production facility for the Tehran reactor, and the uranium tetrafluoride to metal conversion plant under construction, which meets European Union standards. The International Atomic Energy Agency head reported an alpha particle radiation release inside the complex, but radiation levels outside the boundaries remained unchanged. At the same time, at another nuclear plant, Fordow, located inside a mountain, no damage has been detected so far. And as he stated, the International Atomic Energy Agency continues to monitor the situation. The agency is present and will remain in Iran, and inspections will continue as soon as safety conditions allow, in accordance with Iran's obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty safeguards. By the way, today many people picked up on a statement by one of the Iranian officials that they are supposedly preparing to pass a bill in parliament that would, in fact, withdraw Iran from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And today I already saw a message in the comments saying that the Iranian parliament has supposedly passed this bill, that Iran is leaving the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and the decision has been made. No, the decision hasn't been made yet, friends. Iran is basically trying to threaten by saying that they already have a bill passed and that they can leave this agreement at any moment. They have not withdrawn from anything yet. Let me remind you that the Natanz facility is located 300 kilometers south of Tehran. It is located more than 40 meters underground and is protected by a steel and concrete shell, which, according to researchers' estimates, can be about 8 meters thick. The Fordo enrichment plant is built inside a mountain 200 kilometers south of Tehran. Well, after a recent visit to Iran, that same Grossi estimated that the facility is located 500 meters deep in the rock. Well, according to sources, Israel lacks the large bombers needed to destroy it, which is why Israel has already turned to the United States for help. As you can see, Israel is not willing to stop halfway. Moreover, today another strike was carried out on an underground facility near Tehran. Israeli strikes at the same time killed key military leaders, including most of the top echelon of Iran's Air Force, leaving Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei increasingly isolated. But as mentioned, the impact on nuclear facilities was modest, and analysts say that such a prolonged air war may be required to achieve the results Israel desires. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the attacks will continue until Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missiles are destroyed. And he has shown absolutely no signs that he is actually going to stop. And Netanyahu also said that regime change in Tehran is not the main goal of this war, but it could be a result, given the weakness of the Iranian leadership. That's a clever rhetoric, meaning Netanyahu doesn't directly say that we're aiming to eliminate Khamenei. But it could happen that Ayatollah really passes away. Israeli officials have stated that the military has prepared at least 2 weeks of strikes. And on Saturday, French President Emmanuel Macron told his Iranian counterpart, quote, to quickly return to the negotiating table to reach an agreement. Well, the leaders of Arab countries have called for a cessation of hostilities, but there haven't been any other significant statements from them. United States President Donald Trump reportedly resisted a military campaign for most of the year, but has since welcomed Israel's attacks. And now analysts are even saying that all of this was just white noise. All of Trump's statements that he was supposedly against these attacks were just to lull the Iranians into a false sense of security. Well, as Trump said on Sunday, quote, I think it's time for a deal and we'll see what comes of it. But sometimes they have to fight. On the other hand, ensuring a pause in hostilities could give Iran a break to regroup and to increase international pressure against Israel's campaign. Because indeed, regrouping is needed even at the highest levels of power, because a large number of top military leaders and senior officials have already been eliminated. Ayat Ali must promptly restructure the entire system, including at the official level. Not to mention that many of these missile systems, air defense systems and so on, have already been destroyed or damaged. And Tehran, it seems, is now betting that Israel cannot afford to get stuck in this war of attrition, and in the end, it will have to look for diplomatic solutions. At least that's what Arab diplomats who have spoken with the Iranians are saying now. Iranian officials said that, in their opinion, Israel does not have a clear exit strategy, and it will need the help of the United States of America to inflict significant damage on targets like the Fordo uranium enrichment plant, which, as I already mentioned, is located under a mountain. The Iranians know that the United States supports Israel in its defense, and they are confident that the United States also supports Israel logistically. But the Iranians want a guarantee that the United States will not join the attacks directly. Here's an important point to note. Israel really doesn't have the weapons or the aircraft right now that would allow it to destroy underground nuclear facilities. For example, they need the same kind of bombs that are capable of penetrating these bunkers and reaching deep underground. Israel doesn't have these bombs, nor does it have heavy bombers like the B-2 that can carry these bombs and deliver such powerful strikes. That's why, of course, they're now asking the United States to join in on this bombing campaign. And in order to finally resolve this nuclear issue, Iran is telling Arab authorities that it may accelerate its nuclear program and expand the scale of the war if there is no prospect of resuming negotiations with the United States. This is manipulation, as Iran itself withdrew from these negotiations. And right now, there are no signs that Iran is ready to make new concessions in the nuclear negotiations. This is stated by Arab mediators from Qatar, the Emirates, and Oman. And the diplomatic efforts led by Donald Trump's administration were halted because Iran refused to stop uranium enrichment before the talks were interrupted by Israel's attacks last week. Before the attack, a high-ranking Israeli official stated that stopping uranium enrichment is the minimum that Israel can accept from Iran. Israel and the Gulf countries are also concerned about Iran's support for regional proxy forces and its ballistic missile program. This could theoretically become a subject of discussion in negotiations again if Iran is pushed into a deep enough corner. So, it should be understood that these attacks could also be aimed, from Washington's perspective, at forcing Iran to negotiate from a very weak position. Israel has targeted Iran's nuclear facilities and personnel, as well as its military leadership. And over the weekend, Israel and Iran opened a new dimension of the conflict by striking each other's energy facilities. They are also causing rising civilian casualties, regrettably. And now the Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman, are lobbying the United States to try to put pressure on Israel and force Israel to stop the fighting, even if it doesn't achieve its military objectives. Arab officials warn that the conflict could escalate if Israel and Iran do not return to the negotiating table. This could put nearby energy assets at risk, with potentially significant consequences for oil markets and the global economy. But it seems that Israel is really aiming to destroy as much of Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs as possible, and as Netanyahu says, it's possible that maybe even the regime in Iran could fall. This situation bears a strong resemblance to what happened in Syria. Unfortunately, in Syria this took many years, but I'll just briefly remind you, I'll draw an analogy with the year 2017. Israel, in fact, just like Iran now, took control of the skies in Syria back then. And after that, they could freely enter that territory, strike at Syrian regime military targets, and return back. Now, Israel can do exactly the same thing in Iran. From that moment on, what did the Bashar Assad regime start doing when it was toothless in terms of countering an enemy like Israel? He started internal repressions. Maximum internal repressions to maintain control domestically, as external control had already been lost. And then this regime began to slide into a full dictatorship. Plus an attempt to survive by selling, as you know, drugs. And in the end, it turned out that Assad's regime was so weak that the opposition easily took advantage of it. But unfortunately, as you understand, it took a good 7 years. In Iran, it could be much faster, but still, it won't take just days or weeks. That's all for now. Share your thoughts and conclusions in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like.